When my younger brother called and told me our childhood home had been sold, I thought I had heard him wrong. For a few seconds, I stood completely still in the middle of my kitchen, holding my phone against my ear. Rain tapped softly against the window of my small apartment in Chicago. My coffee was getting cold on the table, but I could not move. "What did you say?" I asked. "The house is gone, Maya," Daniel replied quietly. "Mom and Vanessa sold it last week." I felt something inside me sink. My name is Maya Carter. I was 30 years old then, and that old house in Ohio was the only place I had ever truly called home. It was a small 2-story house with pale blue walls, a narrow porch, and an oak tree that leaned toward the roof like it was protecting us. It was not expensive. It was not beautiful in the way people describe homes in magazines. The kitchen floor made noise when you walked across it. The upstairs bathroom door never closed properly. During winter, cold air came through the windows. But every important memory of my life lived inside those walls. My father taught me how to ride a bicycle in the driveway. My mother used to stand by the kitchen stove every Sunday morning, making pancakes while old music played from the radio. Daniel and I carved our initials beneath the wooden stairs when we were children. Even after I moved away, I believed the house would always be there. I pressed my hand against the kitchen counter. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I asked. Daniel was silent for a moment. "Mom said you wouldn't agree." That answer hurt more than I expected. 3 years earlier, after our father passed away, the house had been left to my mother, my sister Vanessa, Daniel, and me. My father's will said that no major decision could be made without all 4 of us agreeing. At least, that was what I remembered. Vanessa was 4 years older than me. She had always been confident, organized, and quick to make decisions. After Dad died, she began handling most of my mother's finances. She paid the bills, spoke to the bank, and kept important documents in a locked drawer at her home. I trusted her. Maybe that was my mistake. "Did you sign anything?" I asked Daniel. He sighed. "Vanessa said it was just paperwork to help Mom. I didn't know they were selling the house until after everything was finished." I closed my eyes. Daniel had always been gentle. He worked at a repair shop and avoided arguments whenever he could. Vanessa knew that. She also knew he rarely read documents carefully. "What about my signature?" I asked. "I don't know." Those 4 words stayed in the air between us. A cold feeling moved through my chest. I walked to the small cabinet near my refrigerator and pulled out a folder containing old family papers. My father had given me copies of several documents before he died. At the time, I had placed them inside the folder and almost forgotten about them. Now my hands were shaking as I searched through every page. There were tax records, insurance papers, and a copy of his will. Near the bottom, I found an envelope with my name written across the front in my father's handwriting. Maya. I had seen it before, but I had never opened it. I remembered the day he gave it to me. He had been sitting in his bedroom, looking tired but calm. "Keep this somewhere safe," he told me. "What is it?" I had asked. "Something you may need one day." At 27, I thought he was only being careful. I placed the envelope inside the folder and never asked about it again. Now, standing alone in my kitchen, I slowly opened it. Inside was a small brass key and a folded piece of paper. The message was short. "Maya, there are things in that house your mother and your siblings do not know about. If the house is ever sold, go to the basement before the new owner changes anything. Look behind the old furnace wall. Use this key. Trust what I taught you and do not let anger decide what you do next." I read the note 3 times. My father had always been a quiet man. He worked as a carpenter for more than 30 years and rarely spoke about money. We had lived simply. None of us believed he had anything valuable, but he had hidden something inside the house, and my family had sold it without knowing. I called Daniel again. "Who bought the house?" "A man named Mr. Harris." He plans to renovate it. When does he begin? Monday morning. It was Friday. I looked at the key resting in my palm. For the first time since hearing the news, I was no longer frozen. I was hurt. I was confused, but beneath those feelings was something stronger. I needed to return home, not because of the money, not because I wanted revenge. I needed to know what my father had hidden and why he had trusted only me with the truth. The next morning, I left Chicago before sunrise. The highway stretched for miles under a gray sky. I drove in silence, listening only to the sound of my tires against the road. Every mile brought back another memory. I remembered Dad waving from the porch after teaching me to drive. I remembered Mom planting flowers along the front walkway every spring. I wondered how a place filled with so much love could be sold without even a phone call to me. By early afternoon, I reached my hometown. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. The grocery store where Dad used to buy fresh bread was still there. The old church bell rang softly as I drove past. Even the neighborhood park looked almost unchanged. Then I turned onto Maple Street. My childhood home stood exactly where it always had, but something felt different. A large white sign in the front yard read, "Property sold." I parked across the street and sat in my car for a long moment. The blue paint on the house had faded, and the porch swing Dad built years ago still hung from its chains. It felt as though the house was waiting for me. I took a deep breath and walked to the front door. A man in his early 60s answered after a few seconds. He had kind eyes and wore old jeans covered with paint stains. "Can I help you?" he asked politely. "My name is Maya Carter," I said. "I grew up in this house." His expression softened. "Oh," he replied, "I'm Richard Harris. I bought the place last week. I know this may sound strange, but my father left me a note asking me to come back here before any renovations started." He studied my face for a moment. "I haven't touched anything yet," he said. "Would you like to come inside?" Relief washed over me. "Thank you," I whispered. The moment I stepped through the front door, memories surrounded me. The hallway still smelled faintly of old wood. The staircase where Daniel and I used to slide down the banister looked exactly the same. Sunlight poured through the living room windows, making tiny dust particles sparkle in the air. It no longer belonged to us, but it still felt like home. Mr. Harris gave me space to walk through each room. I paused in the kitchen, remembering Sunday breakfasts. I touched the old dining table that somehow had been left behind. My mother had promised never to sell it because Dad built it with his own hands. Yet there it was, forgotten or perhaps unwanted. "I'm sorry for your loss," Mr. Harris said quietly. "My father passed away 3 years ago. He must have loved this house. He built half of it himself." Mr. Harris smiled gently. "I could tell the craftsmanship is beautiful." His words made me smile for the first time that day. Finally, I looked toward the basement door. "I think that's where I need to go." He nodded. "I'll stay upstairs. Take all the time you need." I thanked him and slowly walked down the wooden steps. The basement was cool and dim, just as I remembered. Shelves lined the walls, still holding old paint cans, rusty tools, and boxes covered with years of dust. At the far end stood the old furnace, exactly where Dad's note had said it would be. My heart began beating faster. I knelt beside the furnace and examined the brick wall behind it. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then I noticed one loose wooden panel hidden behind a stack of old boards. I carefully pulled the boards aside. There it was, a small metal lock. The brass key in my pocket suddenly felt much heavier. With trembling hands, I slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. For 1 second, I simply stared at it, wondering how many years my father had kept this secret. Then I turned the key. A quiet click echoed through the basement. Slowly, the hidden panel opened inward. Behind it was a narrow compartment built inside the wall. My breath caught. Inside rested a weathered wooden box, several sealed envelopes, and a thick leather journal with my father's initials burned into the cover. I reached for the journal first. Before I could open it, I heard footsteps above me. Someone had just entered the house, and from the sound of the voice upstairs. It wasn't Mr. Harris. I froze. The leather journal was still in my hands when I heard a woman's voice echo through the living room above me. "Richard, I thought you said the contractors weren't coming until Monday." I knew that voice. Vanessa, my older sister. I quickly slid the journal, the wooden box, and the sealed envelopes into an old canvas tool bag hanging beside the furnace. My father had always kept nails and measuring tape inside it. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than another dusty bag. I zipped it closed just as footsteps approached the basement stairs. "Maya," Vanessa called. I took a slow breath and stepped away from the hidden compartment. She stopped halfway down the stairs, her eyes wide with surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing." She folded her arms. "I came to give Richard a few spare keys we found. Why are you in the basement?" "I wanted to see the house one last time." Her eyes moved around the room. She looked nervous, which wasn't like her at all. "You should have called first," she said. "I would have," I replied calmly. "If someone had told me the house was being sold." She looked away. "We didn't think you'd want to deal with all this." "No," I said quietly. "You didn't think I'd agree." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The basement felt colder than before. Finally, Vanessa sighed. Mom couldn't afford to keep the house anymore. Repairs were expensive. Taxes kept going up. Selling it was the practical choice. "I understand that," I answered. "What I don't understand is why nobody asked me." Her expression hardened. "You live in Chicago now. You already have your own life. So that means my opinion didn't matter?" It wasn't personal. I almost laughed. It felt very personal. I studied her face carefully. She wasn't just uncomfortable. She was worried. Her eyes kept drifting toward the old furnace, toward the very place where I had just opened the hidden compartment. A strange feeling settled inside me. Did she know something? Before I could ask another question, Richard Harris walked downstairs. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said gently. Vanessa forced a smile. "No, everything's fine." Richard looked from her to me. He could tell it wasn't. "I'll make some coffee upstairs if either of you would like some." "Thank you," I said. After he left, Vanessa stepped closer. "Listen," she said quietly. "There's no reason to make this harder than it already is. I'm not the one who made it hard." She rubbed her forehead. "Please, just let it go." Those words caught my attention. Vanessa never asked people to let things go. She usually argued until she won. "Why are you so anxious?" I asked. "I'm not anxious." "You haven't looked me in the eyes for more than 2 seconds since you got here." Her shoulders became stiff. "You're imagining things." Maybe I was, or maybe I wasn't. She walked back upstairs without another word. I waited until I heard the front door close before reaching for the canvas bag. My hands shook as I carried it upstairs. Richard was standing in the kitchen, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "Is everything all right?" he asked. I hesitated. "I don't think so." He looked at the dusty bag. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "I found something my father left behind." He nodded respectfully. "You don't have to explain." I appreciated that. Some people ask questions because they're curious. Others stay quiet because they understand that certain moments belong only to the person living them. Richard was one of those people. "I'd like to sit on the back porch for a while," I said. "Of course." The porch overlooked the backyard where Dad had taught Daniel and me to throw baseballs. The old oak tree still stood proudly in the corner. I placed the bag on the table and carefully opened it. The first thing I picked up was the leather journal. Inside the front cover, written in my father's neat handwriting, was a single sentence. "If you are reading this, someone has already broken the promise our family made." A chill ran through me. I turned the page. The journal wasn't about money. It wasn't about hidden treasure. It was a record of everything my father had quietly protected for years. Property papers, bank records, copies of family agreements, and page after page of handwritten notes. Near the middle of the journal, one paragraph was underlined. Never trust documents unless you have seen the originals. Even people you love can be tempted when money becomes more important than family. My heart began pounding. I reached for one of the sealed envelopes. Written across the front were 4 words that made my breath catch. Open after the sale. Slowly, I broke the seal. Inside was a certified copy of my father's final will. It looked different from the copy I had at home. Very different, and at the bottom of the last page, someone's signature was missing. Mine. I stared at the will until the words became blurry. My signature was missing. Dad's instructions had been clear. Every beneficiary had to approve the sale of the house. Without all 4 signatures, the property was not supposed to be transferred. I took a deep breath and looked through the rest of the envelope. There was another folded letter. This one was addressed to me. I unfolded it carefully. Maya, if you are reading this, then something has happened that I hoped never would. I have loved all of you equally, but I also know that grief can change people. Money has a way of testing even the strongest families. Before you believe anyone, find the truth. Do not fight with anger. Let the facts speak for themselves. Tears filled my eyes. That sounded exactly like my father. He had never solved problems by raising his voice. He believed that the truth, given enough time, always found its way into the light. I wiped my eyes and reached for the wooden box. The brass key fit its tiny lock as well. When I lifted the lid, I found several old photographs, a small velvet pouch, and a USB flash drive. The photographs showed our family through the years. One picture stopped me. Dad and I were standing in the backyard beside the old oak tree. I looked about 12 years old. We were both smiling, covered in dirt after planting a young maple tree that never survived the winter. Behind the photo, Dad had written a sentence. The greatest treasure is never the one people expect. I smiled through my tears. Then I opened the velvet pouch. Inside was my grandmother's wedding ring. Mom had always believed it had been lost decades earlier. Apparently, Dad had been keeping it safe all those years. But the ring wasn't what made my heart race. It was the flash drive. I borrowed Richard Harris's laptop, and together we sat at the dining room table. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. I nodded. "I need to know." The computer recognized the drive almost immediately. Inside were only 3 files. The first contained scanned copies of legal documents, including the original deed to the house and Dad's signed will. The second contained family photographs and videos. The third file was simply named, "If they sell the house." My hands trembled as I clicked it. A video filled the screen. Dad appeared sitting in his favorite chair in the living room. His hair was thinner than I remembered, but his warm smile was exactly the same. "If you're watching this, sweetheart," he began, "then I wasn't here when you needed me." I couldn't stop crying. He looked directly into the camera. "I made this recording because I worried someone might try to rush decisions after I was gone." He paused before continuing. "I instructed my attorney to require every legal heir to approve the sale of this house. If anyone tells you otherwise, they are not telling the truth." Richard quietly looked away, giving me privacy. Dad continued speaking. "I've also kept copies of every important document because paperwork has a strange way of disappearing when people become desperate." I remembered Vanessa's locked filing cabinet. Suddenly, many things began making sense. Dad wasn't finished. "Maya, I know you." He smiled softly. "You'll want revenge." I shook my head through tears. Even after all these years, he still understood me. But revenge never heals a family. Justice and revenge are not the same thing. He leaned forward. If someone betrays your trust, let the truth correct them. Don't let bitterness become your inheritance. The video ended. Silence filled the room. Richard finally spoke. Your father was a wise man. He always was. I carefully copied every file onto my own laptop and placed the flash drive back inside the wooden box. Just then, my phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice sounded shaky. Maya, I need to tell you something. What happened? I found something in Vanessa's office. My heart skipped. What did you find? I was helping Mom move some boxes. He hesitated. I accidentally opened the wrong file cabinet. And there was a folder with your name on it. I stood up. What was inside? Daniel swallowed hard. There were several practice copies of your signature. The room suddenly felt very quiet. And there was one more thing, he whispered. I found a receipt. A receipt for what? For the lawyer who handled the sale. He paused. It wasn't signed by Mom. Then who paid him? Daniel's answer changed everything. Vanessa paid him herself, 2 months before any of us knew the house was going on the market. Daniel's words stayed with me all night. I didn't want to believe my own sister could have planned everything so carefully. Part of me kept hoping there was another explanation. But every document, every note my father had left behind, and every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. The next morning, I met Daniel and my mother at a small family attorney's office. Vanessa arrived a few minutes later. She smiled when she saw us, but the smile disappeared as soon as she noticed the wooden box and the leather journal sitting on the conference table. What is all this? She asked. I looked at her calmly. It's everything Dad wanted us to find if the house was ever sold. She didn't answer. The attorney opened the journal, examined the original will, and carefully reviewed the documents from the flash drive. The room remained silent for nearly 20 minutes. Finally, he removed his glasses. Mrs. Carter, he said to my mother, these records raise very serious legal concerns. Mom looked confused. What do you mean? The sale should never have been completed without Maya's approval. Vanessa suddenly stood up. There must be some mistake. The attorney looked directly at her. There are also questions about these signatures. He placed 2 documents side by side. One contained my real signature from years earlier. The other was the signature used during the sale. At first glance, they looked similar, but they weren't the same. The attorney quietly continued. I believe a handwriting expert should examine these. Vanessa's face turned pale. For the first time in my life, she had nothing to say. My mother slowly turned toward her. Vanessa, tears filled her eyes. Tell me this isn't true. Vanessa lowered her head. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then she whispered the words none of us expected to hear. I'm sorry. Mom covered her mouth. Daniel closed his eyes. I simply listened. Vanessa began crying. After Dad died, I felt responsible for everything. The bills kept coming. My business was failing. I borrowed money without telling anyone. She wiped away her tears. I thought selling the house would solve everything. But why didn't you ask me? I said quietly. Because I knew you'd say no. So you made the decision for all of us. She nodded without looking at me. I kept telling myself I'd fix everything before anyone found out. The attorney spoke gently. Unfortunately, that's not how the law works. Over the next several weeks, the sale was officially canceled. Richard Harris understood the situation immediately. I never wanted to own a house that wasn't honestly mine, he told us. He accepted a full refund and wished our family peace before moving on. I will never forget his kindness. The legal process wasn't easy. Vanessa accepted responsibility for what she had done. She repaid the debts over time and received probation instead of prison because she admitted everything and cooperated fully. But the greatest consequence wasn't legal. It was emotional. Mom barely spoke for weeks. Daniel struggled to trust anyone again, and Vanessa had to live with the knowledge that she had broken the family Dad spent his entire life trying to protect. One evening, several months later, the four of us stood together on the front porch of our childhood home. The sunset painted the sky with soft shades of orange. Mom reached into her pocket and handed me Grandma's wedding ring. "Your father wanted you to have this," she said. I shook my head. "No," she looked surprised. "This belongs to you." I gently placed the ring back into her hand. "Dad didn't leave us these things so we could fight over them." I smiled through my tears. "He left them so we'd remember what really matters." Vanessa quietly stepped beside me. "I don't expect you to forgive me." I looked at my sister. Forgiveness wasn't something that happened in a single afternoon. Trust would take years to rebuild, maybe even longer, but carrying anger for the rest of my life wouldn't honor my father. "I can't forget what happened," I said softly, "but I'm willing to begin again." Vanessa cried harder than I had ever seen. For the first time in years, she hugged me without saying another word. Today, the old blue house still stands beneath the same oak tree. The floors still creak. The windows still let in cold air during winter. And every Sunday morning, our family gathers around the table Dad built with his own hands. Sometimes healing doesn't begin when justice is served. Sometimes it begins when people finally choose truth over pride, family over money, and love over everything they were afraid to lose. That was the greatest treasure my father hid inside our childhood home. It was never behind the basement wall. It was waiting inside our hearts all along.